into a really chilling and honestly a pretty disturbing true story that comes out of a remote part of Mizoram. This whole thing is based on the actual experiences of a man named Raghav Mishra, and let me tell you, this is more than just a ghost story. It's really about what happens when two very different worlds crash into each other.
And that's really the question at the heart of all this, right? It's about a guy who's just there to do his job, a totally routine assignment, who finds himself in a place where old rules and, well, even older sorrows still have a terrifying amount of power. All right, so let's set the scene. The year is 2013. We've got our main guy, Raghav Mishra. He's an NGO worker from Uttar Pradesh, and he's been sent out on what he thinks is just a totally standard field assignment deep in Mizoram. Raghav's job on paper was pretty straightforward. He was there to do some documentation, run some surveys, and just coordinate with the local Chakma community. And these folks were known for being pretty reserved, but also incredibly disciplined, living their lives in sync with nature. For Raghav, this was just another day at the office. You know, new place, new people, but the work itself was nothing new. But, right from the get-go, Raghav could tell something was just a little bit off. The entire village seemed to run on this very strict, but totally unspoken set of rules. Like, the second the sun started to go down, all work would just stop. Everybody would pack up and head indoors. And there was this one area of the forest on a hill nearby that was just a complete no-go zone. Nobody went there. Nobody even talked about it. And of course, being an outsider, Raghav was curious. He'd try to ask his local guide, a guy named Suman, or really anyone else, hey, what's up with that part of the forest? But the conversation would just hit a brick wall. They wouldn't get mad or anything. They'd just give him this vague, final-sounding answer like, that side is not for work. And that was it. End of discussion. So for about a month, this whole strange routine is just background noise for Raghav. A little weird, sure, but he's got a job to do. But then, one evening, that vague feeling that something was wrong suddenly became very, very real. So he's working, and he just happens to glance over at an old bamboo hut. And inside, he sees a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a traditional dhoti, just standing there. Raghav looks back at his work for a second, but then it clicks. Wait a minute, he knows that hut. He's been there for a month. That hut was and has always been completely empty. So he looks back up, and the boy is gone. Totally confused, Raghav gets up and starts walking over to the hut to check it out. But before he even gets close, Suman grabs him, and I mean grabs him. And the look on his guide's face wasn't annoyance, it was pure, absolute terror. Suman just drags him away, doesn't say a single word, and honestly, that silence was way scarier than any warning could have been. The very next day, Raghav has to drive to the city office. The trip there is totally normal. But the trip back, well, that's another story entirely. This is where things go from unsettling to a full-blown nightmare. You know how it is, paperwork and meetings run late. By the time Raghav is driving back to the village, it is pitch black. I'm talking no streetlights on a narrow road, completely swallowed up by this dense, dark forest. And then, of course, his engine sputters and dies. He's stuck, completely and utterly alone. And almost immediately, things start to get really weird really fast. First, he hears a sound. It sounds like a child crying, coming from deep inside the woods. He tries to ignore it. He gets out, tinkers with the engine, and when he goes to get back in the car, he sees it. Muddy, child-sized handprints, slapped right onto his car door. And then, get this, he looks away for just a second, looks back, and they're gone. Vanished into thin air. Okay, so now he's in a full-blown panic. He's desperately turning the key in the ignition again and again. And finally, the engine roars back to life. He doesn't even think. He just slams his foot on the gas, peeling out of there as fast as he possibly can. You can just imagine the wave of relief washing over him. But as he glances up at his rearview mirror, that relief turns to pure ice. Because there he is, sitting in the back seat, staring right back at him in the mirror, is the boy. The exact same small boy in the traditional dhoti that he saw in the abandoned hut. I mean, what else are you going to do? He just screamed. He yanks the steering wheel, and for a terrifying second, the car just careens all over the road. He stomps on the brake, and the sound of the tires screeching just cuts through the silent forest. The car jerks to a violent stop. And as Raghav is just sitting there, shaking, trying to breathe, he sees a light in the distance. And then another, and another. It's the entire village, led by Suman, holding torches and running straight for him. So they get him back to the village, shaken but safe. The absolute terror of the night starts to fade as the sun comes up. And finally, Suman sits him down and tells him the story he probably should have heard a month ago. You see, the boy was from their village. His mother, who was his entire world, had died very suddenly. And to try and spare him the pain, the villagers told the little kid that she had just gone away. So this poor child, desperate to find her, climbed the tallest tree in the forest, calling out for her. But while he was searching, he slipped and he fell. His last, desperate thought, finding his mother, was never fulfilled. And that wish trapped his spirit right there in that place of sorrow. And ever since that day, his spirit has haunted the village. At night, they would hear him crying for his mom. He'd knock on their doors, his little voice asking for some food. The villagers were completely torn. They were heartbroken for him, but also terrified. They even brought in shamans, but the answer was always the same. The boy's sorrow, his negative energy, was just too strong. He couldn't be forced to move on because the one thing he wanted, to see his mom again, was impossible. So their only solution, their only defense, was to create those strict, unspoken rules. They would not acknowledge him. They wouldn't go to the places he was known to be. They wouldn't answer his cries or his knocking. They hoped that by completely ignoring him, the energy that was tying him to this world would just eventually fade away. And for Raghav, hearing all of this, it changed everything. The mystery, the strange rules. It wasn't just some local superstition. It was a strategy, a survival plan born out of a terrible tragedy and a whole lot of fear. This right here perfectly sums up the change in Raghav. Before all this, he was the rational outsider, driven by this constant curiosity, always asking, why? Why can't I go there? What's going on? But after that night on the road, he just got it. His whole perspective shifted from needing an explanation to just having a deep, profound respect for their boundaries. He didn't need to know why anymore. He just needed to know, okay, just tell me where not to go. Not long after that, Raghav packed his bags and left the village. He kept doing his NGO work, traveling to other remote places, but he always carried that lesson with him. He learned that some boundaries are there for reasons you might not ever understand, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just respect them. Now, this is an old story, and we can only hope that by now that lonely little spirit has finally found some peace. But it does leave you with a really haunting question. The villagers ignored the spirit out of fear and self-preservation. But the whole tragedy started because the living boy's grief was brushed aside with a simple lie. It really makes you think about the power of grief and the unseen consequences of ignoring it, both in this world and maybe, just maybe, in the next.